exciting, and we're very relaxed right now. So thank you for that.
You should have maybe played something with more drums or something like that.
We have other samples. We will definitely play more stuff.
I brought more stuff. I just don't know what any of it's called anymore. Let's try to get rid of this feedback. Hello.
Turn it down.
Okay, well, hi everyone. I'm Tom McAndrew with the Dolby Content Relations team. We really appreciate y'all being here. This is exciting. We're going to talk with this esteemed panel about sound design for television and film. I'm going to do a little button at the end to talk about podcasts and audiobooks like Mark teased. We had an amazing event last night at Apogee Studio with the SoCal Podfest organization, and it was a great turnout, and it's really exciting working with indie podcasters and getting them talking about their world. But primarily, we're here to talk about film and TV. And I want to thank both Alan Meyerson, Doug Mountain, and Scott Gershon all for being here. When I was preparing for this panel, I was reading down their IMDb credits, and it was literally like, ooh, 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 all the films and shows that they've worked on over the years. You guys are absolute rock stars, and I'm thrilled to be on stage with you. So thank you. So one by one, if each of you would just share a little bit about your background and just what led you to your current role in, kind of your specialty and what you do in the world of sound design and mixing.
You want to kick it off, Scott?
You want me to start?
Yeah, go ahead and start.
Well, my secret is I failed upward. And basically, I was a failed trumpet player, and then I became a failed record mixer. And because I played trumpet and I was a classical musician, and I don't know, if you don't play guitar in a rock band and use that as a way to meet girls, you probably shouldn't be mixing their songs. And somehow or other, at the end of my career, I met a guy named Hans, and that worked out. That was in 1994. It's been 30 years, and since then, I've done 300 movies, 50 major video games, and I'm still active in the record business. I get to mix a lot of stuff that's orchestrally oriented, like Moby and Deadmau5 and stuff like that. So it's a lot of fun. But basically, I because I had a lot of chops in the record industry, especially in the early days of like the first wave of dance records and stuff. I was doing a ton of that in the early '80s, and I had a lot of chops in sort of making things sound aggressive, and film music was, at that moment in time, 1994, 95, 96, really making more of a move, not away from orchestral, but to hybrid. And I just happened to be the right guy in the right place at the right time. And so I got very fortunate. So the first movie I ever did was Speed. It won the Academy Award for Best Sound Mixing. Music mixers don't get one. Just
That ain't right.
any of you in the Academy? By the way, I would have had 7, because I've had 7 films that I've done win for Best Sound Mixing, and blah blah blah. It's, I've done a lot of great movies: Gladiator, 7 Chris Nolan movies, 6 pirate movies, 2 Dune movies, so on and so forth. And it's been a great run. And I want to thank the greatest Pro Tools operator in the world, Larry Ma, who is here to visit, who I would never walk into a scoring stage without. That's it.
Doug, take it away.
I'm Doug Mountain. I'm a supervising sound editor and re-recording mixer for Warner Brothers. I'm now in charge of mixing some of your favorite old movies. I make Atmos from everything from mono old movies from the 50s all the way up to some of the 10 poles of the last 10 years. I do approximately like 20 films a year. I started out as an engineer in this business, was heavily involved with the Academy and the Grammys for many, many years. And I, a few years back, probably 15 years back, I decided to shift gears and go into editing, and became a senior dialogue editor, working on such shows as Walking Dead and Community and countless feature films. My specialty was cleanup, and that kind of led into restoration, which led into Atmos up mixing. So right now I mix Atmos 5 days a week.
Did you also start out as a musician?
No.
No. All right. You're the one.
Piano lessons was as far as I got.
Gotcha.
I'm Scott. I started off as a musician. Mm-hmm. I was a guitar player, but a frustrated synth player. So it got to the point where it was all about pedals and any way to manipulate sound. I soon realized I became a tone junkie. Any way to start creating any kinds of sounds I could. Went to Berkeley in Boston, came out, started programming synths for like Mike Lang and a bunch of studio players. Then somewhere along the line, it became more fun to create lasers. So everything from Moogs and Jupiter 6s to and whatever I got my hands on, which led to Honey Shrunk the Kids, to American Beauty, to, I've done like over 100 movies. Then I got into, in addition to my movies, games. The last couple of movies, by the way, have been Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio, and Nightcrawler, and Team America, et cetera, et cetera. And the games I enjoy. I love technology. Like I said, I'm a tone junkie. I like to bang two things together, figure out if I could put an EQ, pitch it down, manipulate it in some way that creates an emotion. To me, pop music was fine, but I'd hear orchestral music, and I kind of see colors and I see images. So to me, sound is a visual experience as much as it is audio. And then I just thought it was really cool how I can take dissonant harmonics to create tension, and ways that made me feel a emotion based on the sounds I was hearing. So that led me into sound design, and to this day I feel like just scratched the surface, and there's so much to explore on the opportunities to just make people feel things and tell stories.
And you worked on the both of the Last of Us games also, correct?
I did The Last of Us. Well, it's great because ultimately it's about either telling a story or creating an experience. And both do that, games and music. Movies. So the whole point of it, is you feel something. Do you emotionally you're right there. I gotcha. Whether it's kid stuff, I did tons of animation from, Shrek.
I did that.
Yeah, we've done a lot of the movies. Gladiator, it's a small world. And, but again, you start making sounds and you see a little kid giggle and you're like, okay, I've got that. Or you make something so awe-inspiring. There's a story, but it's really an experience. A lot of video games do that. A lot of movies sometimes would do that. So the things to make you go, wow. Pacific Rim I did. So we wanted something big, and Guillermo said 25-story creature. I want to feel that. Make that happen.
And you mentioned emotion, and the reason I brought up the video game was I stink at video games. Once we went beyond a joystick and two buttons, dear God help me. But games like that really involve you in the storytelling, and you genuinely feel attached to the characters when you're actually getting emotionally involved in the game.
Absolutely, and you can even go as far as, because I did a lot of VR, and that's interesting because now we talk about Atmos against a flat plane. Now you start talking about a spherical visual environment with spherical audio information. That opens up a whole bunch of fascinating possibilities.
So let's talk actually about how you all started out in Atmos. When Dolby Atmos first came out, Brave was the first Dolby Atmos movie from Pixar, and we joked that back then everything had to have rainstorms and helicopters because it's a gimmick, and we're working with the new toy and we're flying stuff around the ceiling plane. How did you start out in Atmos, and then how kind of did you evolve in terms of going, this is what the technology can do, and this is how we can help with storytelling? Give us some examples about how kind of your personal evolution.
I can address that.
Great.
So the pandemic came along.
Yeah.
I was stuck at home. I had 7.1 in my living room, and I added overheads. And I dropped my workstation in the middle of the room, and I started playing. And I started to play with content, and then I started to show some of that content to people at the studios. And they were like, wow, this is great. Try this one. And eventually they just started handing me movie after movie after movie to take to the next level. And we came to some very basic understanding about how to make Atmos work for film and television. You want me to go over them? Okay. It breaks down to this. It's 3 basic layers: dialogue, music, and effects. Basically, the story is told by the actors through dialogue. The music tells you how to feel about that scene or that emotion. And the effects basically tell you where you are and what it goes. It's the stage to which the story is being told. And you kind of have to keep that in mind, especially if the majority of what's going on is up on the screen. But we found that if you this was kind of an early accidental thing. We discovered that if you take Atmos, or if you take music and it was mixed in LCR or whatever it was, and you wrap it around into the room a bit, it has a greater emotional impact on the story being told. It has a greater emotional impact for the viewer. And we're like, ooh, this gives you more feels, right? So, but Alan can kind of expound on that a little more.
Sure.
And then Scott can tell us more about effects and BGs and all the
please,
fun
John.
stuff.
So for me, actually, the first time I really paid any attention to Atmos is when I have a day off, I go to movies by myself. I love it. I love going in the afternoon. There's no one there. I sit myself in the sweet spot, and I just experience it. And I went to see Pi, and it was the first time I had heard a music score mixed in Atmos, which it actually wasn't. It was mixed into stems, and then the stems were applied to Atmos by Ron Bartlett, who's a good friend of mine, and it just rocked my socks off. I'm like, this is it. This is what's going to happen next. And fast forward many years, and the first thing I started, the first call I got to do, I forgot the time, but we had Lion King and I had Gemini Man, and they both wanted me to mix it native Atmos. So here's the deal with music. A lot of times the dubbing stage would prefer that you just do a bed, a 5/1 bed or a 7/1 bed, and then they can pick and choose where to put it. Now that's risky because if you have someone that's not a musical cat, then you don't know how things are going to end up. And believe me, I have been in some rooms where that hasn't gone so well. But when you're working with a guy like Ron Bartlett and you're doing Dune, you're in pretty good hands. So I was very comfortable with that. But there are times when I'm asked to mix a native Atmos mix, like on Gemini Man, Lion King, and stuff. And you just develop your technique. And I actually have two techniques I do. One that is for my film applications, which of course now doesn't mean anything because as I just found out, that the thing that was the limitation is no longer there, but where I didn't really use objects because I knew that if I tied up a bunch of objects, then they weren't available for dialogue or effects. And I didn't want to do that. So it was just the bed and a quad height. And I just did a very, very simple. My philosophy is that when it's playing with dialogue and effects, the music does not want to be all over the place because you lose your focus. So it might be the orchestral microphones at the top, or it might be a choir, or it might be a synth pad or something like that. But it's very simple and very straightforward. Now, when I mix records, or I'm doing a soundtrack album of the same music, this is all bets are off, and I actually use a dubbing layout, which basically gives me levels of height. And I can just pitch, I can go from one to the next to the next. Oh, the woodwinds, let me hear what they sound like up there. Oh, that sounds pretty good. Okay, well then I'll put them up there. And like when you listen to that, which I'm sorry, that wasn't the most exciting piece, but I really, my goal is not to have you hear the heights. My goal is not to have you hear the wides. My goal is to create an experience for you that is just an experience and that is full, but you don't even know it until you turn it off. And that's when you're going to really know it. So I've evolved and I keep evolving. I pretty much do all my soundtrack albums through an Atmos shell now, so that I can always go to Atmos if I want to, even if they're only asking for stereo. And I still just respect, for me, my job is to serve the needs of the film. So if the dubbing mixer that's going to do music on the stage wants, just bed stems, that's what I'm going to give them. If they want Atmos, I'll give them that. A lot of times now they're happy with like 714, where I'm just really doing the orchestral and the live elements at the heights, and so I do that quite a bit now.
So Scott, tell us a little bit about your evolution. About Pinocchio is such a great example because it's pure sound design. There's no production dialogue. It is purely post-produced, and it's a great playground.
It's interesting. There's two contrasts involved. So when Dolby Atmos first came out, we were doing a movie called Pacific Rim, and we thought this movie is literally the demo for Atmos because we have height. We have these giant things standing up, and you should go whoop up there. So what we found, because anytime you get a tool, you figure out how to best use your tool. What does it do well? What you think it's going to do? What it doesn't maybe do that as well? Maybe do something else. So two things that I noticed with Dolby Atmos. The first thing is clarity. when we have, because I do a lot of visual effects shows, and there's a lot of sound effects, a lot of music, and oh yeah, dialogue, and we're duking it out. So the thing what Atmos does, it opens everything up. It's not where the music and the effects are just beating the crap out of each other out of the left and right speaker. So now all of a sudden you.
Impression, and that gives you clarity, gives you back transience, it gives you back depth.
Absolutely. The transducers can only do so much movement of complex waveforms, especially in theater, because they're bigger. It just opens things up. And that's one of the things we noticed was we did the mix. We said, this sounds good. We went to the 7.1, went to 5.1. We're like, oh, wow, that's very telling. Because some ways the mix felt very normal, but clear, open, and spatial. So that's the first thing I noticed that Atmos gives you. It just gives you clarity, gives you openness for the mix. Interestingly enough, what I've noticed, and you can tell me on your side, is that in the big action scenes, the big music's going, and sound effects are going, and different lines of dialogue are going, it's actually not as detailed as you think, meaning the panning. Why? Because you've got hundreds of objects moving around. Now it creates spatialness open, but what we found was in the quiet sections. So like, oh, big Atmos movie. No, quiet Atmos movie. We got to the point where it's quiet, and you hear every little nuance. And now all of a sudden, the room's able to breathe a little more. Now all of a sudden, you just hear things, and you hear things over there. And it's always challenging because the movie's on the screen. So you don't want to distract the audience from doing one of these things.
It's the way to get you fired.
Yeah, and it just, because you sit there, I get pulled out of the movies when I start hearing something that's not blended correctly moving around. Now, one of the things like I like to do is sometimes there are reverbs that are Atmos-based reverbs. For what I do, I don't like it. What I do is have anywhere from 3 to 4 reverbs in different places in the room. So I can move things, because I like things longer in the back, get it off the screen, boom, and just let it float back. Anything that creates, from what I do, a giant 7.1 or Atmos reverb, it stays in that environment, which I would think would be great for music.
Right, and I do the same thing.
But sound effects would be horrible for.
Because, and part of this, there's technical reasons too, where if you have a reverb that's not correlated. In other words, if every position of the reverb isn't the same exact algorithm, so you stick something in the center and it just goes, right?
Yeah.
If you have that one a little bit different, a little bit longer, change the early reflection time and stuff like that, you start getting this modulation between them that the ear just hears as space. So you can create a much more deep reverb using stereo, like I do it exactly the same. I have a stereo front, a stereo mid, a stereo rear. But I feed it off of a 7.1 feed.
Correct.
So that all the orchestra is in its appropriate place. Unless I don't want it to be, and then I fuck it up, which is my prerogative, because no one knows what I'm doing anyway. But I've discovered that that's just a more interesting sound, unless you're doing a synth pad or something where it doesn't really matter, where there's nothing, where imaging is not part of it, it's just size and length.
Yeah.
So I agree, and I agree with everything you're saying.
Oh, thank you. And one great thing is sound design and music tango. The point is my Foley, or what I call my sound effects, they're organic, they create reality on the screen. If I take that out, now we're swimming, and we're almost in like a dream state. So it's different techniques. But one of the things I do, because I do a lot of creatures, big roar, right, in the front, I want to sustain it without making it louder. So if I put it in multiple speakers, it goes, row, and it floats back, it's actually lasting a lot longer, but new music and dialogue are hitting the front. Now all of a sudden, we have this tango, so it goes, bum, bum, ba, 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 in the front. Now all of a sudden, there's room for everything because we're in a spatial area. And then obviously, when it reverbs out, the high-end rolls, and it has that nice little sound to it. Because it's really a puzzle fitting it all together. And I'll say one thing that I did recently, we were talking about Pinocchio. It was the first time the mix was designed. And what I mean, yes, we always design, but what I'm saying is, as a story point, the movie, for Guillermo's concept, was a puppet movie. It starts in mono. The whole opening is mono. And then it starts opening in stereo. And once basically Pinocchio starts becoming alive, it opens up and we go full Atmos. And the movie, and it grows and it builds, and then everybody, excuse me if you haven't seen the movie, everybody dies and we go right back to mono. So the movie evolves spatially and ends spatially as a story point. I thought that was pretty cool. That was the first time I've done that.
Something similar to that on Traffic, where all of the dialogue and effects were mono, and the music was very sparse, but when it would come in everywhere and then disappear and you're back in mono.
What's great about this is that we're using Atmos not as a technical tool, but as an emotional tool.
Just to go on your fact, there's a choreography that happens on a dub stage, and I was so glad Chris Jenkins and Ron invited me to actually be the dubbing mixer on a movie a long time ago, Preacher's Wife. And until I did that, I didn't really understand it. But there's as much value to me pulling down something to allow sound effects to come through, and then finding my way back up and let sound effects come back. And there's this natural choreography that starts happening. And before you know it, you have two things that are happening. The music's much more exciting, and it doesn't even have to be as loud.
No, exactly.
You know, Atmos is a great, the volume of movies has come down, unless I'm mistaken. I believe that because I did a lot of Bruckheimer movies, but the volume is a little bit less harsh and painful now than it used to be. But yet we have more depth and more excitement and good mixing, but it's also the environment, the Atmos environment.
That's a great point you made about storytelling and actually using sound to help tell the story, like the beginning of Pinocchio and the transition from mono to going wide. When I talk to podcasters, we talk about it's a pure audio medium. The sooner you can engage sound as a device to help with the storytelling, you get sound involved actually in the writing phase. And that really helps with the overall quality of the project. And I'm glad to hear that that was part of your experience with Pinocchio as well.
Well, great music is storytelling. You know, it's even at all levels. Maybe not in the 2000s because it's sort of become a sort of less involved thing. But if you listen back to the stuff that Clear Mountain does with He'll Be Here Later, and it's all about storytelling and music for film. I mean, that's why I love it, because dialogue is my lead vocal. So I just make sure that I keep out of the way of my lead vocal. And I love being part of that, the dance that happens with that. And when a dub is good and I watch the movie, I'm like, shit, that's me up there.
So now let me count. So in the dialogue world, one of the things that we've kind of learned with Atmos is it's primarily you leave it up on the screen, but if you shape the reverb to match the scene and what he's laid out, or you can actually make it feel, put the listener or the viewer more into the moment, right? So it helps to kind of sell the location, especially if it's scripted and it's been shot over a series of time, over different takes and different angles. Once that dialogue is smoothed out, if you put that into the scene, the shot itself, or that set with an appropriate shaped reverb that matches it, then you can turn around and you can take things like Foley and copy that reverb down, and use like a full Atmos, like Liquid Sonic's Cinematic Rooms, or some of the exponential Stratus 3D. Once you kind of shape that, and you can shape the reverbs at that point, of how much you want to kind of remain in the room. But if you just give it a little in the overhead and a little, and it's decaying quickly into the back, but it helps to support what they're doing because it feels more natural into the space that you're viewing. Traditionally, we used to, there's been some evolution. Originally, reverb was added to kind of help smooth out bumpy dialogue, and backgrounds were put underneath to kind of help you kind of take out the bump of all the shifting room tone that was happening in the dialogue, as well as like adding a fair amount of noise reduction. So, but if you take that, once you've done that sort of basic dialogue processing, and then you turn around and you put a nice little 714 or 916 reverb on it, but keep it more front heavy, then you end up with a very convincing moment that once the music supports it and the backgrounds tell you where you are, you can. And then the other thing we found too with a lot of, going back and readdressing some of these classic movies is you can go in and then extract from what used to be a very sort of limited front heavy mix, and kind of start to pull stuff out into the room. I use a lot of isotope RX, to isolate sound elements, dog barks, car horns, crickets, and you can start to work those things into the room and wrap them around so it feels more natural than, supported with, some, more three-dimensional backgrounds. You can really sell the moment. And I found that approach works best, whether it's a new movie or it's an old movie, right? You can use Atmos to sell the moment that the scene is supposed to be taking place.
And one thing I want to add to this as well, I did a movie called Book of Life with Jorge Gutierrez, and we did something really fun. I love crowds, so since the beginning of my career, I kind of broke the rules because I didn't know what the right way to do it. Like I was born on the 4th of July, I grabbed a bunch of people outside, and I ran them around because I wanted to create Vietnam with actors. So in Book of Life, I actually rented a bull ring in Mexico and brought 100 people in, 50 there, 50 there, put mics everywhere. I had mics in the tunnels, I had all these different mics because we had to do a sing-along, chants, and crowd reactions to Manolo. And we recorded it, and it was wonderful, I'll be honest. I played it for Jorge, he's like, that's a bull ring. That's literally a bull ring. No reverb, didn't have to put any reverb. I love recording spaces. And we put in Atmos, and it was great. We just put, okay, these mics are gonna go here, these mics go there, boom, dead on, and of course we kept moving the people. So 50 here, and we kept moving them, and we spent 12 hours. I was conducting them. I was a crazy person in the middle of a bull ring in Tijuana. And it was great. So you had like, there's my sides, and I'm thinking this way, okay, there's my center, and I just did it, and we over and dubbed it. It's the old music trick. Get a small orchestra, and you make them bigger. And so I did that, and it was great. I didn't have to add any reverb, just a little EQ. And to be honest, the easiest thing, the recording took a long time. Once I edited it in, sunk it all up, it just played. And I love when they don't have to use reverb. American Beauty was that way. Pinocchio was different. But I like it where I love recording in space to be able to, it's the best reverb you can buy,
So you mentioned earlier talking about, the big action scenes, that's kind of the obvious use case, but also the smaller, the dialogue scenes, the more intimate moments. When I talk to new creators about working in Dolby Atmos, and they say, well, Atmos is for this, but not for that. And it's like, no, Atmos is for everything. And an example I always use is Chef's Table on Netflix, foodie documentary series. Why do you need Dolby Atmos for that? But there are such lovely moments in that show, like a scene, Mashma Bailey, Chef Bailey is out on a shrimp boat, and there's only a few sonic design elements, a little bit of water lapping, some birds, some cicadas, a little breeze, only a few sound design ambiances, but they're placed in three-dimensional space. You are now on the boat with her. And that's not time-consuming, that's not expensive, but it's still a really impactful moment. And I'm just gonna go ahead now and grab the third rail and say, tell me a little bit about your thoughts about time and expense of Dolby Atmos versus old school 5.1. How do you think that has evolved, and what kind of budgets and costs and time do you think it takes?
I'll add that, but I want to add one special thing I was going to say. I've learned most of my stuff from this guy and these guys, because whether it's a decatry, how the recording styles, how they record, what are they thinking when they record, all these things. I'm a mixed magazine like everybody else. I'm going, what a great idea. Maybe I could take that concept, yeah. But drums or guns, all of it.
Array specifically for Atmos now, so that in along with my decatry, there's a 11 mic Atmos
So you have like
array.
a ceiling mic setup?
Believe me, it's crazy. It's cost me more money than I've ever spent on any one thing in this industry.
But see, this is, even though he's doing score, I'm doing sound effects, there's so much to learn from both of us. Like, oh, how'd you do that? Oh, that's a great idea. So I think that's where I've always learned. To me, They used to say that the definition of music is organized noise. So I feel I'm doing music. I feel we're all doing music. I feel we're all using the tools to be able to like propel a story. But to your answer about budget, I think, I mean, because I'm the caboose of the train. I'm the very last thing, so we get beaten up a lot. Well, you finish before we do, though. Like about a couple days before.
No, okay, a couple of days before.
It is days. It is like we go in and reel 1's done.
Yeah.
And we do reel 1. Reel 2 is not done yet.
Music-wise.
Music-wise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes we have to change the order of our reels because they're not done on reel 3. So we're going to go to reel 4. So just as I finish mixing reel 3, I get a phone call. Hey, we're not going to reel 3. We're going to go to reel 4. And I'm like, okay, then you need to invent 20 more hours for me to mix it in because it is not mixed.
Yeah, I'd say, you know, it's interesting. Atmos has sort of become a standard. And there's one thing that nobody's talked about here so far with Atmos, and I'll say conceptually, but it does work, is the scalability. So now instead of us having an SDDS, a DTS, a Dolby, and now all of a sudden we have a scalability that makes it much easier to be able to go from Atmos to 7.1 to 5.1. I would still like to recommend to all the Dolby people, stems haven't really been thought out correctly in Dolby. I mean, yes, you basically do beds, and you can put the beds in there, but we figured a workaround. But speed-wise, it could be faster if there were other options available, potentially.
So to me, it's almost no expense addition because it's baked in already. So whenever I work now, I'm working in an Atmos template.
Yeah.
And I can, if I'm not mixing in Atmos, well, I don't have to listen to the heights and I don't even have to go through the renderer, but I can still be in my template. And that way, if they ever want an Atmos, it's available to do. And with the recording, I'm always recording an Atmos immersive array. So all of this is part of what I do every single day. So, you know, all the learning curve is increasing all the time, things change. But, you know, I'm out of kindergarten, I'm in middle school, and now I know to bring my books home and I know to have my, so I know how to start in it so that I can't say to them, well, I need another 14 days to mix Atmos. You know, I don't want to say that. Sometimes I do, but I don't. If it didn't start, and it used to be if it didn't start in Atmos, then it was a big deal. But now, even if I'm not starting in Atmos, I'm talking specifically about soundtracks now, it's just easy to do it. You know, I have this thing that's happening. Let me just finish this point. I have this thing that's happening right now. It's I'm mixing a World of Hans Zimmer tour TV show, right? And I'm working off of the mix that they did because I just don't have time to remix the whole thing, and they did it in stereo. So I reached out. I said, "Did you want this in Atmos?" "Oh no, I want it in Dolby." I'm like, "Okay, well, Dolby what?" And she goes, "Oh, Dolby Atmos." Okay, so I have to build it, which it's going to take a little time. But once I build it, it's done. Once I build it, it's built. So I have templates that I work with. I have my scoring Atmos template, I have my soundtrack Atmos template, I have my jazz Atmos template, I have my EDM Atmos template. Not really, but I will. The first time I get asked to do an EDM album in this century, because I haven't done one since last century.
Question I had for you was, does it take you longer to mix in Atmos than 7.1?
No, it doesn't really. All I do, for me, mixing is a weird process because I work really, really fast. Yeah. And then I put it away and I do something else. And then I come back to it and I sit there and I go like this. So the beard stroking part of it is just more fun. Yeah. But it doesn't really take me any longer anymore. I mean, it did at first when I was learning how to use it. But now it's I sort of committed to what I want my sound to be in Atmos. So. No.
I find the same thing. That's why I was asking you that when you were asking about the cost of Atmos, everything's Atmos now. It's just
part of it.
It's part of it. So it's not. I don't think it takes a whole lot longer. It takes versioning. Well, is a different process. having to create all the TV version, the theatrical version, the airline version. That is a thing.
One other thing about Atmos, when you work in Atmos and I'm not even talking about the binaural render for your stereo track, which is one thing, this Atmos thing that Apple does and all that, which, at my 66-year-old years, but even the stereo mix down that I get out of Atmos sounds just really interesting and more dynamic, and I can use way less reverb because I hear the reverbs, which I don't always like. I don't really want to hear them. I actually use a lot of post-production reverbs because I like making tiny little spaces on things to just get, like that. So I use on Altiverb, I use the outdoor spaces all the time on like guitars. So I lost my train of thought, but did I answer the question?
No, Doug, go ahead, please.
So because of the improvement in the tools over the last many years, I now do what took 4 people to do. So it's gone from 5 or 6 people making an Atmos mix to just myself and maybe a little bit of help from somebody else. That's it. And instead of taking a month and a half, we're down to like a couple of weeks. That's it.
I can tell you that one of the downsides was my piles and piles of analog outboard gear are now piles and piles of door openers and plant stands and stuff like that. I have finally, the only thing I ever use outboard is an occasional outboard reverb that I'm getting into digitally in and out. I've decided at this point it just doesn't make any sense anymore. So as much as I love some of my old, gear and stuff, and it's funny because I love microphones. So instead of spending the money on a compressor, I'm just going to buy another microphone.
Those are paintbrushes.
Yeah.
Yep. So I love hearing all your responses to that. When I talk to mixer friends, I'm so gratified to hear that, look, I've been mixing in Atmos for a while now. I know what happens when I pull all the levers. If I have a post-super coming to me with a show and saying, we're only going to deliver 5.1, they say, I'm going to mix it in Atmos anyway, and I'm going to give you a re-render. It's just how I like to work now. And I'm glad to hear your comments are kind of, to an extent, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but kind of mirroring that philosophy now that the maturity of some of the mixers with technology has really come along. Before I ask my next question, how are we on time? I didn't... Fantastic. All right. So that leads us to our next question. You guys have gobs of experience with Dolby Atmos. For artists or engineers or producers who are just getting started, where do you recommend they start? What's a good jumping off point for getting your feet wet? Your living room.
Seriously.
Listening.
Yeah, just listening.
If you don't have an Atmos setup yet,
Get one.
well, yeah, but use the binaural, sort of rendered Atmos thing because it gives you. My assistant is here somewhere. Walter, where are you? There he is. Walter does Atmos. He renders Atmos and he listens on headphones in his house, and he gets to learn that way. And he did an Atmos class and everything like that. So, that's the great thing about this is it's just so available now, and all you need is a decent laptop, a good set of headphones, and some software, and you can start learning. And then when the time comes, if you want to buy a set of Gen LX or go to the next level, you go to the next level.
Doug and Scott, speed round advice?
That's basically it. Just start listening to things you like and figure out why you like it. Find out where's the music being placed, where are the effects, how are they ending up, what's the decay, how does the dialogue sound to you, and then just start getting your hands on content and experimenting as much as you can.
And as I say, as a musician,
You got to hear it.
I call it the inner ear. So when I can read a script, I can tell the director exactly what the show is going to sound like. It's just this weird thing because I hear it on the script. Close. I think that if you listen, if you love music, if you love film, and you watch a lot of it, you start getting a vocabulary. And you start piecing, the same thing directors do when they go, I got that cut from Godfather, and I put that camera angle from this movie. And they become, encyclopedic of how to tell a story with a camera. Same thing we're doing with audio. I think the first thing you can do is have to listen. You need to know what people are doing. hear what they're doing. So when you finally get your instrument, you have an idea what you want to do with it rather than going, I got a panner. You know, you're still going to experiment. You're still going to need to put one object and contrast it with another object and see how it plays and how do you want to do with EQ and all the things that you do in the mixing process and design process. But listening, I think, is always the first thing. The second thing is just play with the gear in any way you can. And interestingly, if we say headphones, it's the beginning of it, but yesterday I got my ears scanned for VME over at Sony. Yeah, I have no clue how it sounds because I haven't played with it yet. But the concept is, theoretically, I could put the headphones on and hear Atmos at the Novak stage. We'll see how that works.
There is a piece of software, and I'm not here to shill software, but there's a piece of software that's my mix room. And it's you put on headphones and it renders it into headphones like you're sitting in my mix room. And you know, is it exactly sitting in my mix room? Of course not. But is it a good space to listen to music? Yes. Yeah. I love what you said. I taught that to Walter. When he first started working with me, I said, okay, pick out 5 albums that you love, sit there with a piece of paper and sit in the middle of the speakers, and I want you to write down where every instrument is and where is the reverb and where is that. Ear training, it's all about ear training. I mean, it's everything we do. It's all the technical stuff doesn't mean anything if you don't, you know, if you're not good at music, you know, so the ear training is so important. And same thing with film. I love the idea of really, you know, unfortunately I do it when I don't want to do it, like when I go to any movie. I'm like, oh, that was a cool reverb, and this is like, shut up and just enjoy the movie, Alan.
We're all ruined on it.
Yeah, we are.
Before we start Q&A, we heard the Dune music piece. Did either of you bring clips that you were dying for folks to hear? All right, questions. Who'd like to ask a question?
Microphone right here, so
okay.
Hello, thank you. I'm thinking earlier you mentioned about visuals accompanying the Dolby Atmos, and I'm remembering a couple of the exhibits at Epcot in Florida. They were 360-degree films for the Chinese and the Canadian exhibits. They were 9 cameras and 9 microphones and 9 speakers, and I would have to call that immersive, if anything else. So I was wondering if you guys envision, with this technology of the Sphere in Vegas and such, as Atmos kind of leading the way into that next generation of film.
Scott, who mixed the latest version of the Canada movie, he does actually use the Dolby Atmos renderer. So the Atmos tools are being used in non-traditional spaces, including some of the themed entertainment venues, including Epcot.
Do you know what the first surround spaced movie was?
I do. It was Fantasia.
It was Fantasia. Yeah. That's right.
Fantasound. Yep.
So this has been around a long time. We're just getting better at it.
Yeah.
And it's nice that it's spatial now with Atmos. I did a T2 3D when it used to be Universal, and it was 24 speakers. Mm-hmm. And we were thinking, like, what panel can we use?
I actually did the Millennium Show at Epcot. All the music you heard, like the fireworks, and when they're rolling around, I did it. And we actually went down to Epcot, and I mixed it at Epcot from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. And I had a map of all the speakers, and I could put anything I wanted to, well, within limitations of 1999, I could put anything where I wanted to, but we recorded it at Abbey Road, and I put up microphones everywhere because I knew I would have that, so.
It's funny, folks in the themed
You become night
space.
mixers.
Yeah. I have some good friends in that space, and they're like, hey, let's rub some Dolby on it. And I always tell them, thank you, but when it's a bespoke venue, by all means use our creative tools, but we're not going to make money on it, because at the end of the day, you're just going to print off tracks for each speaker and play it out of a bin loop. And yeah, Dolby doesn't make money there. So thank you, but it's not really our business. Next question.
Hi, this question is more pointed to Alan and Scott. Talking about recording and creating from the ground up in the Atmos space, just concepts. How do you consider what you call how do you commit your object's choice on a per mic level, and are you finding yourself leaning towards tendencies of gain staging per where you imagine it in space, and your different mics, maybe DPAs, or just to open up about how you guys are doing it?
Well, Mind if I grab this?
No, go
Yeah,
for
go
it.
ahead.
Do it too.
So again, there's two ways I do this. One is exactly what you're talking about when I have an opportunity, and I have some ADMs here from this video game I did, Jedi Survivor, where it was just a singular Tootie orchestra, and I used Atmos for microphones. And the way I did it, all credit to Ron Bartlett. Again, I'm going to talk about Ron Bartlett every day of my life until I die. I started with his template, and basically what he does is there's 5 sets of auxes, and you can just raise yourself up in it, and you can sit there with the microphones and just play with what wants to go where. So like I found that I like raising up the low woodwinds, so I can have the woodwinds sitting up in a slight bit back. And I find that my low end wants to be a little bit more grounded, and my big drums want to be grounded but a little bit wider and brought up a little bit. So there's no rules. This is the beauty of this, folks. Everyone is going to use it exactly the way it's good for them, and no one's wrong and no one's right. So I won't do something and say to someone, oh no, you didn't do what I did, so you're wrong. It doesn't mean anything. So you just got to experiment around. But in terms of recording, I have, like I said, an array. It's DPA 4041s actually. It's an 11 mic array that I put up, LCR, sides, surrounds, and a ceiling quad that goes with the Decca-Tree, and it's like fills in all the empty spaces that you never knew you had when you were just using your Decca-Tree for the last 40 years. So it's guys, we're sort of at the bleeding edge of a new generation of how music's going to sound. I'm sorry?
Honestly, from a sound effect standpoint, did you have a question?
Oh, no, I was just saying, how do you commit in your thinking to with the channel counts and the object counts, the actual place?
Because it's preset. I'm not moving any objects around. I use the objects as static things. So it's preset. So I'm using a bed and then maybe like 30 objects. And it's just a preset thing, and they're all levels. You'll never see objects pan around on one of my mixes. I do the panning in Pro Tools. Yeah.
I was going to say, for recording sound, for those people on the sound effect side, I actually have a mobile rig that's an LCR rig. I do 2 8040s and an ORTF with an 8050 down the center in a blimp. So this way I can either record mono or stereo of the choice, or a full LCR if I'm a little bit off. And I like using a lot of microphones to record, but I'm also going for bigger. I'm not like recording a room for the room. I'll put mics 20 feet away from each other because I want to get wide. I don't want to get spatial mono. I want to get over the top wide, or we record mono stereo and we place it in an Atmos environment.
We're at time right now. Alan, Doug, and Scott, thank you guys so much. This was fascinating. I learned a lot.
So we're going to take a quick 5-minute break, but while we're on the break, we are going to use these speakers because we set them up. We're going to play some clips of podcast audio as well as other clips that Alan brought as well. Our next session, we have the Pro Tools team showing you how to set up an Atmos mix. But if you need to grab a bathroom, need to grab a drink, it's a great time to do it as we prepare for our next session. Thank you so much.
Dodger, Charlie, what's happening? Dodger, Charlie, what's happening?
He's running! And if I was you, Oliver, I'd run too.
What?
Those boys! Stop them!
Oh no! Wait for me!
Here he goes! Stop them!
This way!
Wait! Why did you take that man's handkerchief?
What do you think? Keep up.
But why?
Here they come, Dodger. Coming this way too. What do we do? Dodger? Stop, thief! What? Stop! Thief! Here he is! Over here! This little one!
Who? Me?
Yes, here he is! Stop, thief!
I'm not the thief! No! Wait! I'm not the thief! Get no!
Mr. Punch hit the baby! Smack, smack, smack! Judy cried. Baby died. Never he got laughing.
Dodger! Charlie! Where are you?
There he is! Over there! By the Punch and Judy shop!
It wasn't me! What?
I got him!
The game appeared on a paranormal message board with very simple rules. Get in your car and take a drive. Take a left, then the next possible road on the right, then the next possible left. Repeat process ad infinitum.
There's a hitchhiker on the road. Now you pick him up, you take him where he needs to go, but you do not, under any circumstance, do not talk to him. Ever.
What the hell are we heading into?
I have no idea.
Look, I ain't asking you to believe me, but I told you. This street, this is your last chance.
As ridiculous as it might sound, I think my friend may have documented her own disappearance. If you know anyone involved in this story, any of the locations mentioned, anything I can use to get in touch with Alice, please don't hesitate to contact me. Were you in the area on February the 7th of this year? Did you meet or speak with a girl called Alice Sharman? Has anyone heard of the left-right game?
The Left Right Game is a new audio drama from Q-Code, starring and produced by Tessa Thompson. Listen to the first episode on March 23rd. Subscribe to the show for free wherever you find your favorite podcasts. You can also learn more at qcodemedia.com or by following @QCodeMedia. Experience brilliant room-filling sound with Sonos. Expand your audioverse at sonos.com.
Hello, hello, testing, testing. All right, everybody, thank you so much. We're now second session. We have Christopher here from the Avid Pro Tools team. He's going to talk about how to mix the perfect Atmos mix using Pro Tools, and we'll be doing that for the next 30 to 45 minutes. Welcome, Christopher.
Thank you, Matt. Hey, everyone. It's great to see you here at KeyCode. Today, we're going to take a look at how to get started mixing immersive audio, Dolby Atmos, inside of Pro Tools. So, as you've heard from people like Alan, there's a lot you can do with the music. There's a lot you can do with films, such as the projects that Scott's been working on. So we're going to take a look at solutions for immersive audio inside of Pro Tools. So, of course, the hardware is where we're going to start here. And the hardware that we're using here today at KeyCode is the Pro Tools Matrix Studio. And the Matrix Studio is a fantastic interface that lets you take your outputs and send audio to all of these speakers that you see here. So we have this 7.1.4 Genelec system here at KeyCode today, and all of that analog audio is being fed from the Pro Tools Matrix Studio. So there's a couple different ways that you could actually hook up your computer, whether it's a laptop like we have here, or a Mac Studio, or a Mac Pro, to the Matrix family. So the first way is Matrix Studio and Thunderbolt 3, and that's exactly what we have going on here. Thunderbolt 3 is a really fast and easy way to be able to connect to your interface. It is simply leveraging the core audio via Thunderbolt, and using the Matrix Studio, you get 64 channels of bidirectional audio. So you have plenty channel count to be able to do all of your Atmos configurations, including your re-renders. So with Pro Tools Studio 2024.6 and the internal Dolby Atmos renderer, you could actually be mixing up to 7.1.4 using all of the analog outputs on the Matrix Studio. So you have the Matrix Studio with a Thunderbolt 3 option card. You're able to do your binaural headphone monitoring, both Apple and Dolby. You're able to use the Matrix Studio to calibrate the room. And we were talking about how that's so important earlier today in the Dolby presentation, to be able to ensure that your mix will translate across systems, to be able to calibrate your room and ensure that what you're listening to out of your monitors is truly what you're processing in Pro Tools. So you can use the Matrix Studio, the built-in SPQ card, to be able to tune all of your outputs. You can also use our free Avid Control app to put on an iPad to actually have some hands-on control of both monitoring, but also using the touchscreen to be able to pan things around in a three-dimensional space. We can use Pro Tools Studio to be able to have our live loudness monitoring, and now unlimited re-renders. So all of that is built into Pro Tools with the internal Dolby Atmos renderer. Now let's look at a slightly more advanced system. We're still going to use the Matrix Studio as our main interface, but now we can incorporate an HDX card. And that HDX card is going to open up possibilities for DSP. So we have the ability to have some plug-in processing power using the DSP with onboard the HDX PCIe card. But we can also have a larger format now because we can use Pro Tools Ultimate. So using an HDX system allows you to take the full capabilities of Pro Tools using Pro Tools Ultimate, and you're able to use the internal Dolby Atmos renderer to mix 916. And this 916 format is a new update in 2024.6 that allows you to take control of the full capabilities of Dolby Atmos. So here we have a Matrix Studio connected to an HDX card. We can see a Mac Studio here as our host computer. We also have an S1 and a dock, and this is going to give us some hands-on tactile control with actual faders on a Yukon network that we can connect to Pro Tools. So adding these control surfaces allows you to actually spill out some of your pan controls across the faders, and you can actually lift objects up in the air using your fingers magically on the S1 to write that automation. So our second option here is the Matrix Studio with a single HDX card. Now, if we're looking at building an even larger system for mixing Dolby Atmos, we could take a look at incorporating a Matrix 2 with multiple HDX cards and a larger control surface such as the Avid S4 or Avid S6. Now, using a Matrix with HDX cards allows you to use Pro Tools Ultimate. It allows you to use either the internal Dolby Atmos renderer that is now native inside of Pro Tools 2024.6, or you can also interface with the dedicated Dolby Atmos renderer. Now, you can interface with that external renderer on the same machine or on a separate machine. Now, you can do that a few different ways. You can use Thunderbolt, or you can use Dante or even Maddie to connect to a separate machine to connect to that external renderer. So we have a Matrix 2 connected with an expanded HDX engine, meaning more than one card. We are still able to pull out our binaural headphone monitoring, both Apple and Dolby. We can calibrate our sound system using the built-in SPQ card of the Matrix 2, but now we have a much larger control surface using an Avid S4 or an Avid S6 to really build a custom mixing profile. So let's take a look at what's new in the internal Dolby Atmos renderer in Pro Tools 2024.6. So the biggest update here is new monitoring and re-render formats. So now you can do a 7.1.2 format. You can also do a 9.1.4 in Pro Tools Ultimate. But we also have something very cool, Stereo Direct, 2.0 Direct. And we are going to talk a little bit more about this later on, but this is a fantastic new feature that brings a true stereo mix based off of the immersive mix right to the creatives. Now, we also have brand new object view groups and binaural modes, and we can see that on the actual track, both in the edit and mix window. And we'll jump into Pro Tools later and take a look at where exactly that is. We can also assign groups directly from the track, which you can do while the transport's running, so you can create these dynamic mixes while you're actually playing back and mixing in real time. What else is new? We can access all these features by this little gear icon that's in the Dolby Atmos window. So again, we're going to open that up in Pro Tools and see where all of this lives, but you can see we can take a look at our headphone re-renders. We have our loudness re-renders. We have our custom re-renders. We can jump to our I/O setup. We have trim and down mix settings, and we can access our groups. And all of that is conveniently located in one single page, all things Dolby Atmos, in the Dolby Atmos settings window. Something that's also new in 2024.6 is the ability to solo and mute Dolby Atmos groups. So you can actually assign your effects, your music, your Foley, your backgrounds, your dialogue, and you can solo them out. And using these groups, I'm going to show you something very cool later on. Earlier in the panel, we talked about making stems. Making stems has been a little difficult in Dolby Atmos. Well, now making stems, making a music and effects export is very easy, and we can do all of that with the built-in Dolby Atmos renderer inside of Pro Tools. We have these new monitoring and re-render formats. So the Stereo Direct, let's talk about it. Traditionally, the stereo re-render was a down mix based off of the 5.1 down mix. The direct is now derived from the full Atmos presentation without that intermediate process. So it's a much clearer, more accurate description of that true Atmos mix. And that is now built in both as a live re-render and an offline re-render inside of Pro Tools. We can change our binaural modes either in the Dolby Atmos setup window or directly from the track, and we can do that live while the transport is playing, so you can actually hear those changes in real time. How do you get Dolby Atmos out of your speakers? It's very simple. You create one monitor path. The monitor path that is your Dolby Atmos setup in your room. In this case, it's 7.1.4. And from that, you're able to choose all of the derivative formats directly from the internal Dolby Atmos renderer. So in this room, we have 7.1.4. Once we open up Pro Tools, we're going to be able to see that we can play 7.1, 7.1.2, 5.1.4, 5.1, stereo direct, and even binaural. The integrated Dolby Atmos renderer carries a lot of the features that you're used to from the external renderer, such as multiple views. You have your theatrical view, you have your floating head person view, but we also have our meters here, and we can change those meters from your film meters or your Dolby meters. As we've mentioned before, there's a lot of plugins that are compatible with this Dolby Atmos format. Here you can just see a quick glimpse of many of them that were named earlier: Cinematic Rooms, Fab Filter. We have a few sound particle plugins as well, Lustrous Plates. So all of these plugin manufacturers are now developing their products to integrate directly with this new format, which of course you can put on all of your tracks inside of Pro Tools. And one of the last new very cool features of Pro Tools 2024.6 is the ability to bounce, commit, and freeze Dolby Atmos immersive width tracks. So you can actually take live re-renders and freeze or commit them. So this allows you to put on plug-in processing, such as a limiter or any type of equalization, to actually process that stem that you create from your re-renders for delivery. So let's jump into Pro Tools and see where all of this lives. So here we are in Pro Tools, and if you want to get started very quickly with Dolby Atmos in Pro Tools, we are going to go to our dashboard. When you open up Pro Tools, you'll get this window here. This is the dashboard. If you come over to Getting Started, and you come down here, and it's the last little box in the center of this window, it says Dolby Atmos Guided Tour. It says Open Dolby Atmos Demo. And if you open up that demo, this is the session that's going to come up. This is a Dolby Atmos music session created by Matt Lang. And inside of here, if we collapse all of these folders, we can see that we have different food groups in here. And we're going to see how we can use groups to make navigating this session a little bit easier. But let's play back this session to see what we have. So here's our internal renderer. And as you can see, we're monitoring in 7.1.4. Great, so let's dive into the Dolby Atmos panel right here. So the way you can open this up is you come over here to Window, and you come all the way down to the bottom, and you see Dolby Atmos Renderer. Now, if you don't see this enabled, it'll ask you, do you want to enable the Dolby Atmos Renderer? Yes, and this is what will pop up. Now, we can access the I/O setup from this page. The first thing that you need to do to be able to get started mixing Dolby Atmos is you need to configure your monitor path. So if we go to output over here, we can see that we have two monitor paths. We have a 714 output, and we have this binaural output. And that 714 output is our main monitor path over here. Because we set that as our main monitor path, we're able to see 714 as an option inside of the renderer to be the maximum format. And if I play back this session, let's jump to the middle here. I can immediately fold it down to stereo. I still see all of my immersive panning, but I can go from stereo to 5.1, 7.1, and right back up to 7.1.4. So all of that is built inside of Pro Tools. You don't have to interface with any external monitor controller. It can all be done by this monitor dropdown right here. So let's take a look on the left side at all these different dropdowns that are available. So we have headphone re-renders. So you can disable it, you can use binaural, you can listen to the stereo direct, or you can listen to the stereo fold down. Right now we're listening to the binaural, and that's what we've been outputting to the stream. Now, below our headphone re-renders, we have our loudness re-render. Depending on how you want to monitor, you could put a meter on the stereo direct, or more traditionally, you can use the 5.1. So where does this go? If we take a look down here in this session, on the left side, we have headphones, and we have loudness. And this headphone input is this headphone selection here. So changing binaural to stereo changes the feed here, and we simply send it to an output. In this case, if we go to the I/O setup, we go to outputs, we have binaural. It's going out 13 and 14 via our, if we look at the playback engine, Matrix Studio. And so it's simply coming out of Pro Tools Thunderbolt on channels 13 and 14. And that is our binaural rendering. If we take a look at loudness, we have 5.1 here, we have loudness over here. If I change loudness to stereo direct, it no longer comes up in this loudness pane. It's not the same width. We have loudness, we can put a plugin on that, and we can monitor our loudness. Now, where it gets really exciting is custom re-renders and groups. But before we get to the really exciting part, let's briefly talk about trim and down mix. Trim and down mix can be set here in this window. You can have multiple presets, so you can save presets and recall them. What I like about trim and down mix is that if someone is sharing a session with you and their trim and down mix sessions saved to that session do not match your previous trim and down mix sessions on your Pro Tools system, this will turn orange and say, hey, I have different settings applied. Do you want to use these new settings, or do you want to revert to your old settings? And so this trim and down mix will turn orange, this small gear will turn orange, and that is Pro Tools telling you, hey, check your trim and down mix to make sure these are the settings that you want to use. Now, the cool stuff, custom re-renders. It makes sense to talk about groups before custom re-renders. Groups. We open this up, and what do we see? Manage bed and object groups. So shipping with Pro Tools, we have our traditional dialogue, music, effects, and narration. You can make any type of group that you want. So, say we want to make drums. Say we want to make woodwinds. Say we want to make background vocals, lead vocals, any number of things, guitars, synths. Now we have all of these groups. Not only do you have these groups, but we can color code them. We can hit OK. Now, if we go over and take a look at our tracks, we'll close this Dolby Atmos pane here. Okay, we have all these leads. Now, here in this window, we can see our inputs. We can see the outputs. These are going to beds here. It's an object. We can see our binaural mode, and we can actually change this directly inside of the mix window here. We can turn it off, near, mid, far. These are all mid. But below that, we can set our group. So we could make these all lead. So now these are all lead vox. We have these ambients here. We could make these background. If we take off groups. Now, if we go back into the Dolby Atmos renderer, we can actually see these groups up here. We can solo them, we can mute them. But if we go to the custom re-renders, we can actually make a custom re-render or offline render of any flavor we want using these groups. So we can say I want it to be live and actually bring it back into Pro Tools to either re-record live inside of Pro Tools or simply use it to monitor on a bus, such as the 5.1 loudness re-render. But we can take this and we can name it M&E. We can choose any type of path we'd like here, any type of width we'd like. We can even do something that's larger than what the session is. But say we want to keep it consistent, we want 714. Custom. We can actually choose what we put in here. We can say, I only want the beds, I only want the objects, or I only want specific groups. So if we're doing music and effects, maybe I only want the music and effects. I want all the beds and all the objects. Maybe I just want the beds. So I can do music and effects bed, M&E bed, M&E objects, we can designate the format. We can hit OK, we can save that, and now when we go to bounce our mix, we can choose Dolby Atmos. We can create those re-renders, and you can actually choose which ones you want, and you can output all of them in a single pass. So this is a really great way to be able to create stems, to work in Dolby Atmos really from even the conception of a project, right? Just like Alan and Scott were talking about earlier, hey, it's going to start in the recording process, and I want to place these microphones here, and I'm going to build this Dolby Atmos template inside of Pro Tools, whether I receive all of these multiple microphones or not. Maybe I'm just receiving a traditional stereo mix, right? And you decide that you want to break it out later. You can do that inside of Pro Tools, and if you're building with the internal Dolby Atmos renderer, even only using it to pan music, pan objects, pan sound effects spatially, but still render in a stereo format, you can use these groups and these custom re-renders to export those different stems automatically. You don't have to go back and reconfigure your mix. You can actually just tweak everything that you've done up until that point. You can save it. You can save different presets of re-renders, and it allows you to quickly and easily take your project outside of Pro Tools to be able to publish it into the real world. So I know that was a lot to talk about in a short 35 minutes, but I want to open up the floor to any questions here. There's a lot that we covered, but this is really only the tip of the iceberg for what's new and what's coming for immersive audio inside of Pro Tools. Microphone? I don't need one. Share.
The re-renders there for 5.1 loudness and the headphones, are those coming on aux inputs then in Pro Tools?
Yes, so you assign them. So if we go to the I/O setup here,
I didn't know if they magically appeared in your session once you decided you wanted to have them.
so when you open up this session has like dead end if you don't want to send it, the nothing bus, you know? But yes, simply you just create a bus for that, and it sends to that bus. Questions? Yeah. You know, Media Composer's catching up. Look, we love Media Composer. Media Composer's a part of the Avid family. You know, currently, no, you can't do Dolby Atmos inside of Media Composer, but what you can do now in 2024.6 is, I think you're going to like this, you can actually export a Media Composer compatible session. Export selected tracks as new Media Composer compatible session. Now, this is very cool. I don't have the right session here to show you what this would do with video and everything, but to condense it into a short couple of things, if you have video in your Pro Tools session, it's going to consolidate your video so you can send it back to Media Composer, right? It's going to create a couple different folders for you. Now, exporting to Media Composer is a new feature. We've had export to Pro Tools and Media Composer for about the last 12 months. When you export from Media Composer, it creates the video track, it creates a cuts track. It actually creates 3 different folders. So if you're a video editor, yes, you're probably processing some of your audio clips using audio effects, stuff like that. You want to be able to share your vision as the video editor with the sound editor, so the sound editor can hear exactly what you were hearing in your edit bay. So when you export at a Media Composer, what it does is it creates 3 folders. It creates a raw audio folder, unrendered audio. Then it creates a rendered audio folder, so it bakes in all of your effects, so the sound editor can hear exactly what you were hearing, and it gives the sound editor the option to use what the video editor was using in the edit bay. It also gives you a 3rd folder with just that rendered only audio, so it's very easy to see what clips were processed by the video editor, so you can go back and reference them. Also, all of your markers carry over from Media Composer. So that all gets put into Pro Tools, and this brand new export tracks as a new Media Composer compatible session will take all of that and send it back to Media Composer. It'll preserve all of your marks so you can actually write notes to the video editor, and this is making the round trip a little bit more feasible, concise, and organized. What's very cool is if you are editing video and audio on a Nexus shared storage system, a Nexus F2 SSD shared storage system to be very specific, you can actually link to all this media. So if you are a picture editor, you're working with the media, you don't have to export all that media if your sound editor is working in-house in the same facility connected to that same Nexus. So you can actually share media, it links to it, you don't have to package it if you're not sending these files outside of that Nexus F2 SSD environment.
We're going to cut off Q&A for now. We're going to move up to our next session. One of big round of hands for Christopher. He's going to be here after. So if you guys want to ask him any questions, he will be here after the next session. But we wanted to move into our last panel discussion, and then we'll be here for another hour and a half for you guys to experience the Dolby Atmos home theater experience, as well as get questions answered by Christopher and any of our participants here. So we're going to bring on Tom back to the stage, as well as Alan Meyerson and Bob Clearmountain. And while we're getting them, if you want to go ahead and queue up some of Bob's tracks, we're going to play some music tracks that he mastered in Dolby Atmos.
Now the party's over, I'm so tired. Then I see you coming out of nowhere. Much communication in emotion, without conversation or a notion. When the samba takes you out of nowhere, when the background fading out of focus, yes, the picture's changing every moment, and your destination, you don't know where. When you bustin' over, there's no holding. Would you have me dancing out of nowhere?
I'm still Tom. You again?
I'm still
yeah,
Alan.
He's still Alan. Bob Clearmountain, ladies and gentlemen. And the Dolby Atmos version of Avalon is just butter. For 80s kids to hear it in Dolby Atmos, it was gorgeous. And Bob, actually, can you start with the story you told the Podfest group that you were so kind to host last night about how the singer at the end of the piece was discovered? I love that story.
Oh yeah, well, yeah. When we were recording this, I was mixing it upstairs in Power Station, and around 82, I think. And so there was we're on the edge of feedback here. A little, do I have something wrong? But there was a Haitian group recording in Studio A, and Power Station, you come into, at the time, you come into the lobby, and you're behind Studio B, and Brian Ferry came in for a session, and he hears this angelic voice echoing through the hallways, and coming from the lounge in Studio A, so he follows this beautiful sound and finds this little Haitian girl who was warming up for her session that was in Studio A. And he goes up to her and says, "Who are you? Would you sing on my record?" And she couldn't really speak English, so they got somebody to translate, and she thought, "Well, sure, yeah, I'll sing on your record. What do you want me to do?" And that's how he found that singer that was in your left rear speaker at the end there.
What was her name again?
Yannick.
Yannick Etienne, right?
Yeah, that's it. Whoa,
Yeah,
you're good.
I've listened to this album 5,000 times
For real.
before I ever met him.
And she ended up touring with them, right?
She ended up touring with him. She's a little round Haitian girl, just a lovely person, and just obviously an incredible singer, and kind of gone down in history there.
Telling us the history of your time at Power Station and actually the mixing console that's at Apogee Studio, and David Bowie, Let's Dance, and off the top of your head, just a couple other tracks that I'm sure this group would be familiar with.
Yeah, let's see. Well, Bryan Adams, a bunch of Bryan Adams things, Rolling Stones, Springsteen. Springsteen recorded The River on the console we have now, and let's see, just Roxy Music, of course, and I don't know, there's a bunch of others that I don't remember.
For a gear nerd and just a musical history nut like me, I was gobsmacked. That was fun to hear about. Alan, tell us about your history. Like, you're mostly doing film sound these days, or music for films, but tell me, going back into your musical history.
First of all, when he was doing all that, I was doing Cadillac commercials. So.
No shame in that.
Yeah, I bet you did. I bet you. But that was how you started in those. I started at Brooklyn College, but my professional career started doing commercials and as an assistant engineer. It was funny. The first time I was I like to call myself a trumpet owner because I certainly wasn't a player. So once I hit college and I realized that every plan I had in the world was shot. And I'm walking down the hallway smoking a joint and I hear music and I walk to it. I go, "What's this?" And it was the sound studio at Brooklyn College. So I got an internship and then I got this job and doing commercials, and I got it. It was one of those things. It's sort of, I don't know if you had the same experience, but you stare at what's going on. You watch a session going, "Oh, that's how he's getting to there," and "Oh, that's how they're getting their headphones and stuff." I didn't look at it and go, "Oh my God, what is all that?" I sort of got it, and I never looked back. It was just from that day on, I was going to spend my life in a recording studio. So I did that for a while. I had some success. I ended up getting into the record business through a commercial producer and started doing dance records. I worked at a studio called Shakedown with this guy Arthur Baker, and I was sort of in that first wave of dance music that came to New York, Chicago House and stuff like that. A very minor player, but as a mixer, and sort of got my chops doing that. And then I actually because I did one of those, I got an introduction to Brian Ferry and mixed this album called Bête Noire, which sucked because I had to listen to that and then figure out what am I gonna do? But at some point you just do it. You stop thinking and you do it. And it came out okay.
Great. I just did Atmos mixes for that.
I thought you were going to call me for that. Did you do them already?
Yeah. How were they? Yeah. Well, I had to make them sound as good as your mixes. It was not easy.
Anyway, so I did that, and I had a career going, but I never felt at home. I was a classical trumpet player. Bob he was a bass player in a punk band. That belongs in the studio making records. What I was doing,
I own a bass too.
Well, that was a bass owner, but I played second trumpet in the second orchestra. But I loved it, and I loved the orchestral feeling. What he was talking about before, like the orchestral music, sort of it takes you somewhere, and it took me somewhere. So when I started in the 90s, and I started getting very frustrated with the world, it became hip hop, and I wasn't comfortable doing that. And then I had a room at Larrabee Studios that I had booked for like 2 years, and then all of a sudden they kicked me out because Dr. Dre was coming in to do the first Snoop Dogg album. And I'm like, okay, I might be done with this. And I got an application to chiropractic college, and I'm going to skip the next 9 levels of the story and just say somehow or other I met Hans and the people that worked at Remote Control, and ended up doing a session with him. And he called me back the next day. I thought I had screwed up, and with Penny Marshall, who's this New York, Brooklyn Italian, and I'm a New York, Brooklyn Jew, and we communicated at a very subconscious level. And he says, "What are you doing for the next 3 months?" And that was '94, and I'm still doing it. And now I don't just work with Hans anymore. His career has shifted. He lives in London. He's touring, so I've had the opportunity to build my career based on that, and gotten to work with everyone: Elfman, Howard, John Powell, Harry Gregson Williams. It's been just an incredible ride, and I get to sit next to him.
We have being musicians in our salad days in common. I was a saxophone owner, and people say, "What kind of band were you in?" And I was like, "Marching."
No girl wants to meet the guy playing trumpet. My one career.
Nobody cares about the bass player.
Oh, that's not true. Believe me, more bass players got girls than trumpet players did. But my one band I was in, oh my God, I can't believe I'm saying this out loud, was called the Orions, and we were a disco band, and we played at, if any of you have seen the movie Saturday Night Fever, we played at that club. It was called 2001 Space Odyssey, and I had to wear my orange polyester outfit with the big, and with all the little stud, no shoulder pads, but we sucked. It was just incredible how bad we were, but somehow or other we got gigs, and I got out of that pretty fast. It wasn't for me.
So let's fast forward up to transitioning from stereo mixing to the Dolby Atmos days. I think in the very, very early days of Atmos music, people are like, geez, here we go again, because they saw DVD audio and Super Audio CD that basically bashed each other to death, and neither one was successful. With Atmos, we kind of have a unified format that people are kind of in agreement with, and the tools are there, and it does help. Tell me about your early days of starting to mix for Atmos and learning the technology, and initial impressions of, hey, where's this going?
Well, for me, it was. I had done the first 3 albums for the band. I'd remixed them in 5.1 and stereo. And then the 4th one came up, the Cahoots album, and they called up, they said, "Oh, can you deliver an Atmos mix this time?" And I was like, yikes. Well, yeah, I could do that. Looking around my room, okay, what do I have to do? And so I figured it out over the next couple of weeks. Stuck some speakers in the ceiling and whatever. Luckily, I had some extra BM15As sitting around, and put them on the sides, and I did it. I'm actually still pretty happy with that record, and Robbie Robertson kind of let me do what I wanted on that one, which is great. And but that's what happened. But I'm still learning about what to do, and I want to make one little comment, and I'm a little scared to do this, but I've just been going through I've been making a playlist of spatial audio songs, because at Apogee we're doing this little art show next week, and we wanted some background music, and we've just redone our studio space as an immersive listening area, and so I wanted to do this, and I was going through a whole bunch of stuff on Apple Music, and there's some really great sounding things, you know. But I've noticed that very few people use the center speaker very much. And I just don't understand it, because you walk into a mix room with these speakers, like you're sitting there, the thing right in front of you is the center speaker, and what do people say? They go, well, I'm not using that. Yeah, I know, staring me in the face, but I don't want to know.
Maybe a little bass.
You know, and so it just surprises me, and it's so funny going through the playlist, and every time one comes up where they do use the center speaker, and things are, it's like, oh, whoa, now the singer and the drums are in the room with me, and it immediately sounds so much better, and I'm just shocked that so few mixes are done that way. I mean, I can understand it for movies. When I've done some score stuff, just for some minor stuff, yeah, and some few other things. I did something for my daughter who did a documentary, and I don't put anything in the center because, of course, that's where the dialogue is. You just keep it open. But with music, that's where the main thing is.
Devil's advocate on that, if you want. I think that a lot of the mentality of that, or at least my mentality of that, I do something different. I put equal amounts of those things in all three speakers, so no matter where you sit, the vocals in the center, the bass is in the center, and stuff like that. But, you know, I'm always afraid that on, you know, a home Atmos system, that the center speaker is going to be someone's TV when they have like real speakers left and right, and there's going to be no subwoofer. So I'm afraid that if I put something primarily in the center speaker, that there are going to be people that are going to hear an instrumental version of it. That's the thing that scares me.
Yeah, but we use sound bars, you know?
Yeah, now it's different. There's no doubt, but that's where my mentality of it came.
Right. Okay. Fair enough. Yeah. But there's something else that if you're standing there, it doesn't matter whether there's something in the center speaker or not. But once you walk over here, all of a sudden the whole picture collapses, and you're hearing everything out of this speaker. Right. But if you have a center speaker, then the picture stays the same. You know,
the focus. If I put the bass and the vocal at equal volume through all speakers, I get that same phenomenon.
Same thing happens.
Right.
Yeah, that's why. You know, if you kind of focus it more in the center. I'm not saying you should do it that way. I'm just saying it's just my opinion. It's just totally my opinion about it.
It definitely is a religion thing in Dolby Atmos music mixing, or multi-channel mixing in general. Is do you actually put voices in the center or phantom it out? That's one thing I love about your Huey Lewis and the News remixes is his growl coming out of the center channel speaker. You know, you appreciate the vocal performance, and I'm sure a lot of artists really don't want you walking right up to the center and sticking your head up to it. But I love it. It's one thing about rediscovering some of my favorite albums and tracks that's really, really fun.
Yeah, I mean, go through, and if you have a system to listen on, luckily I can, you know, I have this loop back thing, and I can listen to Apple Music through my system at home, and it's just striking to me. But anyway, enough of that. Let's move on.
So you mentioned your experience with the band and that kind of being your aha moment. Alan, what would you say one of your earliest moments was with?
When I saw the movie Pi. And I heard that score, which was mixed by a guy named Brad Hanel, but then given off to, as all of you heard me wax on about before, Ron Bartlett, who made it. It was the first Atmos mix I had ever heard. It was an Ang Lee movie, and I was just like, wow, this is how it's supposed to be, you know. And so I always had that in the back of my head, and then it was quite a few years before I needed to do that. And I remember, I think it was Lion King was really the first one, the new Lion King, where I mixed it in native Atmos. I had experimented with native Atmos since then. Dolby had put a render in my studio, and I put up some height speakers, but I didn't know what I was doing. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, by the way. Sometimes not knowing what you're doing is how you're going to make the best art, because you're not limited by what you think is right. But Lion King was the first one that I did, and it came out really, really good. You know, flawed, but good. And then I just finished it, and Ang Lee was actually in the building about to do this movie Gemini Man, and with a friend of mine, and I told him the story. I said, you know, I fell in love with Atmos because of Pi. And he's like, really? So he asked what I was doing. I said, I just mixed Lion King in Atmos. So he came into my room, and he listened to one of the cues from Lion King, and he turned and he goes, I want you to mix the music in my movie. So but he wanted me in New York. So they gave me a dubbing stage in New York at the studio called Soundtrack. And it was a film stage, and I did it there because he wanted to come every night at 9 o'clock. He would come over after he was done dubbing, because we were dubbing and mixing at the same time because they had thrown out a score. And he would come at 9 o'clock and listen to my mixes. The composer wasn't even listening because he was busy writing, So it was like one of those. It was like Team America. The score was written, mixed, and recorded in 11 days. So it was insane. Wow. You have a composer who doesn't stop writing, and you just don't stop mixing. Right. Yeah.
For new content, we talked about catalog remixing and so forth, but for new content, do you approach a project that's going to be in Dolby Atmos differently in terms of recording and tracking, or do you still use your same or similar practices? You talked a little bit about having a modified Decca tree for some of the recordings you make.
But when I record orchestral stuff, I've sort of built, and when I say me, I didn't invent this. This is me applying some things that I had learned from some very smart people and making an investment in these DPA 4041 microphones, and I built a 11.0 tree, left, center, right, side, left, side, right, surround, left, surround, like quad top. And with all matching mics, that was the trick. And it changed my life. I mean, I didn't even realize that there was another dimension available, because you mix my whole life on Decca trees. I got pretty good at it. My mixes sounded good. And then all of a sudden you push up this fader that has the mics on it. It's like, oh my God, it's like we just filled in all the holes in the sound. And then you take it out and it sounds wrong, I'll play it for you. I'll play you some of that. So that was an eye-opener for me with it. So everything I do now is ready for an Atmos mix. But when it comes to mixing, when I mix for a film in Atmos, I do a very limited thing. It's just whatever I recorded. If I had height speakers, they go in the height. But I'm not getting into getting super creative with all the other stuff, because you're not hearing the dialogue. You're not hearing the sound effects. You are hearing the dialogue and the sound effects, but you're hearing a version that's 5 versions ago, and you're really not sure. So I'm a little conservative. But when for example, I just did Gladiator, and the new Gladiator, and I did a very nice surround mix. But when I did the Atmos soundtrack album, it was like the chains were removed. I could do whatever I wanted, and it was just so much fun. So I have a different technique for doing film, which is very limited, and the one I use for soundtrack albums is much more involved.
Do you make significant changes between the soundtrack that's on the album versus, the soundtrack that's on the film versus the soundtrack album? Are there a lot of tweaks?
Imaging-wise, yes. Sonically, I try to. If the request is for me to keep it, sometimes they say do something. We don't care. But if it's meant to, I'm constantly referencing my original mix, and then making sure I don't screw up.
Gotcha. All right.
We just had to do Interstellar, and I mixed the original 10 years ago, and so this was like, oh my God, if I get this wrong, he's just going to kill me.
Bob, how would you say your techniques have evolved over the years, from that first band album to what you're doing today? Are there notable, I'm going to do it this way now, kind of changes that you've made in your style or philosophy?
I think I try something a little different each time, maybe, or I try to anyway. I tend to walk around the room a lot more, because I'm more and more conscious of, I don't want people to have to sit in a sweet spot. I mean, most people listen on headphones to what I do anyway, so that probably doesn't really matter, but I think it will matter someday, because I think more and more people will get systems where they can hear this stuff on speakers in the future. I know that Sonos has an amazing system that I have set up in my studio lounge, and it's pretty damn close to what's going on in my mix room. It's incredible, just off of Apple Music. And so that's happening. And I'm mixing more for that. I'm not. I mean, even though I check on headphones just to make sure the binaural sounds okay, I get a little confused when I switch to Apple Music because that changes things in an odd way for me. But basically, I am checking. But the main thing is because the speakers are never going to change. You know, that format is here to stay. The binaural and the spatial audio, they're constantly improving that, so that's going to end up being different. Yeah, I kind of, you know, I try to refine the effects. I really like to kind of make things bigger and smaller. Like I use the Atmos for the dynamics in lots of ways, where something will start out just in the center with a voice and then expand, and at the chorus just having it explode. You know.
So let's talk about that actually. What is kind of generally the philosophy on what stays up front? What can you put, like even dry in the back? You know, what immersion versus distraction? Where do you kind of draw that line, or is every project different? Or what's kind of to both of you? What kind of are your philosophies?
It's a creative thing. For Dune, it's one thing. For Gladiator, it's another thing. For Moby, it's another thing. You know, it's depending on what you're doing. I don't think that there's one necessary rule. You know, if there was a rule, I guess the percussion elements have to sort of feel pretty solid in the front, and you know, if you want to use percussion in the sides, just make sure it's balanced left and right, and or left Atmos, which could be left and right, or like that thing that we played before. It's got stuff going on in the top that's kind of crazy, but you don't really notice it. It just feels full. You know, for me, that I think that's probably the only rule is
keep the song in mind, the piece of music, and what's trying to be conveyed in the music, and to, you know, listen to the lyric and listen to what it's about, and get a feel for what the artist is trying to get across. And if anything is, you know, if you're looking over there for something, and it's while the story's being told, then that's not right. It shouldn't distract. But you can do things like on that thing when we played Roxy music, you hear a sax solo in the back, but those things aren't really conflicting with the song. You know, in fact, they're you kind of want to turn and say, oh, who's that over there? You know,
it's a fine line. One thing I love about hearing Atmos remixes of albums that I've been in love with for literally decades is, oh my God, I never noticed that horn part, that backup vocal, and to be able to shine a spotlight on some of those elements, again, without breaking the mix or distracting from the holistic sonic image, is kind of magical to me.
Yeah, but I kind of also want to be feel like you're sitting in the middle of the recording studio during the recording session, you know.
And there another phenomenon I had is like Avalon is, you know, I think I've listened to Avalon as many times as I listened to Steely Dan's Asia, you know, and
why isn't there an Atmos mix of that yet?
Yeah,
that's a whole
right with you.
With a whole other,
yeah, although I did
want you to do
on
that.
eBay, my DVD audio, some of Fagan's solo CDs. That's my retirement plan.
Let me. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me just finish my thought for a second. It's so when Bob invited me over to listen to it in his studio, and every single moment in that record has significance to me. So like I waited, like at one point in the middle chorus, he has the vocals and they go Avalon, Avalon on the stereo album. So I'm like waiting, you know, it's like, how is he going to do this? And it's like, oh, fuck me, it's okay, yeah. It was for me because I had such a relationship with the record. I was already sucked in, so I started on like 5 and I just went up to 11.
Thanks so much.
I mean, that's, you know. Like Slave to Love, I don't even know if you did this, but the snare reverb pans from the left to the right. It goes, Slave to Love. Oh. You did do that.
I remember.
I think I told you that like 20 years ago. When you said, did I do that?
Yeah. Not to Steve, did it on
I haven't heard that one yet.
Yeah, it's not out yet, the Atmos version. I did it though.
You have my number.
Yeah, okay. You don't come over and listen. Yeah.
So I asked you this last night. I'll give you another run-up on it. To be blessed with having done the original stereo version and then doing the Dolby Atmos version and cracking open your multi-track tapes, what do you typically find you have, or what do you wish you had? It's like, geez, why didn't I have the original dry recordings versus the printed tracks with the EQs and the compression and so forth? Like, what do you usually have? What do you wish you had? What do you kind of use to build your immersive version compared to what you started out with in the stereo version?
Well, I basically have the same thing that I had when I had the stereo. The only thing I don't have is Power Station had a 75-foot stairway that was chamber 1, and it was just magnificent. And unfortunately, I don't have that anymore. And it got kind of destroyed before anyone got a chance to do any impulse responses. But there's a lot of things out there. There's a lot of, Altiverb has a bunch of some amazing environments that they've done impulse responses for. So I was able to get pretty close.
Do you find you have to do a lot of forensic work to kind of recreate?
I'll just try a million different reverbs and things like that to try, just try stuff. Yeah, I mean, so often I'll just sit there and go through 15 different reverbs and then different delays and different delay times. If something calls for delays,
That's what Altiverb's really good for, because now with Altiverb 8, it switches almost instantly.
Yeah.
So you can just like if I'm looking for a hall, I can just audition every hall they have until one hits the width and the size and the low end that I want.
And then there's an app plugin called, I don't know where they came up with this thing, it's Clear Mountains Domains. And there's lots of little fun things you can do in there with Atmos.
There is, yeah.
So get into the nuts and bolts a little bit of it. We talk about using audio objects to actually fly things around, the spaceship or the jet fighter or what have you. Do you find yourself mixing music primarily in beds? Do you like to use objects, and either objects in motion or static objects, just to find more point sources around the room? What's your philosophy on beds versus objects for music, both of you?
Well, like I said, so I don't tend to automate objects that much. My objects are static, and there's basically 5 levels. There's the bed, and then there's the ground level. That's the same as the bed, which I won't have to do anymore because now there is 714. But so I could have a 714 bed, and then there's the next level up, which is 20% up, then 20% up and 10% back, then 20% up and 10% back, and then ceiling. So, and I just have them all on auxes. So I play everything at the flat level, and I just start thinking about, well, what would sound like if the guitars were up a little bit higher? That doesn't work. Okay, well, let's turn it back down to that, and let's try the shakers. When I just play, I just beard stroke until I find something that I like, but there's no rules. So that's the way I do it because I can, and it's what I'm used to, and I know it's getting easier to not do that now. But I think that this is where we differ, because you have a simpler system.
That's because I have a very simple mind.
Simple mind makes a simple mind directly.
Yeah, I've been doing that too lately. But I basically use the bed, and then I have 4 stationary objects for the height speakers, and then I have 4. I'm mixing on an analog desk and an old SSL 30-year-old SSL G series, and so I have a limited number of outputs, and the last 8, there's only 32 buses, or there's 24 buses, because the last 8 are aux sends. And so I have 4, if I want to move something around, I have 4 buses, and then I just record those on separate tracks, and then after I mix it, I go in and fly things around. But I don't, most of the stuff's stationary. A lot of mixes that I do, nothing moves,
Yeah, I don't move around stuff. I'm not really into moving around stuff. I subtly move around stuff. There's a great plugin. Is Tony here? Made by this company, Sound Particles, and it's an energy panner. And I use that, but I have this theory, and I know you prescribe, most mixers prescribe to this, is that when everything sits static with nothing going on, the ear gets lazy and tired and a tiny bit bored. So I like having little panettes going on and just a tiny little bit of movement on a bunch of different things. So I use these panners to do that. It's an anything to anything panner, so I can go out to full 916 if I want to, or I could just do a quad panner, and I'll just do a tiny bit of panning and then just blend. It's great now because everything has a blend on it, so I could do this wicked crazy panning and then just add 3% of it. And it just creates this sort of, I do it a lot on albums with pads, like when pads are just sitting there. So I'll put, whatever the tempo is, I'll put a 16th note panning delay on Echo Boy and just turn the density down to like 4. So you don't even really hear it panning, but your ear stays engaged. So, my stuff is really dense, so it's I don't really, I need to work with space in a slightly different way because there's so much, my average mix has 1,000 tracks, right, Larry? More. And so I'm constantly looking for ways to keep clarity and depth and imaging and width. And I'll tell you the one thing that it isn't is reverb. Reverb is great, but if you can eliminate it or lessen it, the more you do that, the more clarity you can get. So those types of tricks and that's sort of my meat and potatoes of it, is just to sort of create things that you really don't hear but you sense. Very, very dry reverbs. Like I use actually post-production reverbs, like the outdoor spaces on guitars and stuff. So you don't even know it's on there until you turn it off. Eventide, their plugin, the SP2016, is great for that because you could just push something back like that much, and so that's.
Yeah, I used a quad impulse response of our Apogee Studio actually for the height speakers, and so you really, yeah, it's nice and you don't notice it until you turn it off, and then it's like, oh, what happened?
That's the magic. The finished mix. I don't want you to go, wow, I'm listening to an Atmos mix. Isn't this fucking awesome? I want you to just listen and go, this sounds great. And then if you switch to the stereo, you're like, oh my God, that's a lot, So that's my goal. There are different, I always use and with all due respect, and I love them, but the Eagles Hell's Flies Over technique of mixing where there's a voice in each, and nothing in the center. It's just, that's not me. There's nothing wrong with that, but that's just not me. It's not what I wanted. I don't want you to notice that there's shit flying around and all that. I want you to just feel like you're sitting in a chair, but you're slightly elevated in that chair and you're sort of being drawn into it. That's the way I think about it.
So we'll start Q&A in a second. Very briefly, give them your advice for folks just starting out in mixing music in Dolby Atmos, producers, mixers. What one-liner advice do you both have for everyone?
Putting you on the spot.
All right, well, my advice would be to, before you print your mix, just walk around the room listening to it. And if you have a room where you can, it's even better if you can get behind the speakers. Like a room like this is great because you can actually walk behind. So there's a lot of rooms where they're built into the wall, so you can't do that. But still don't just sit there in the sweet spot. That's my advice. And Apogee, use an Apogee Symphony Mark II interface. I don't mean to knock the.
First, I don't really know the answer to that because it's always different all the time. My whole advice for mixing is I like to work fast and get it almost ready and then put it away and then come back and spend as much time as I want in that last level, so where I'm really just being creative and I'm no longer thinking technically. I don't have to worry about busing. I don't have to worry about frequency notches and any of that. I'm just listening to music. And that's my most successful thing. But for someone who's just starting out in Dolby, start slow. Don't put everything in the, if everything's in the height, all you're doing is making mono. Yeah. You're just making mono up there. Agreed. Totally agree. So start slow. You might even want to just start in stereo. And then slowly go, what would that sound like if the guitars were up there? Oh, well, that's cool. Okay, well, let's do that. And okay, now space is opened up. And the minute you open up one thing, you start opening up the Pandora's box. So it's just, I think it's mixing is starting slow. You know, it's like even the skill of mixing is starting slow. It's just, you know, like when I was mixing a lot of records, I'd get a balance as fast as I could, and I'd just start from there, you know.
Yeah, because I do most of my mix in stereo. I mean, I'll mix it stereo and get it to sound like a record as much as I can before I even assign anything to the other channels to, you know, until I break it out.
Right. It's much easier to do that, and especially because if you're just starting out, you might be in headphones, and you know, you might be sort of early in your journey, and you know, I mean, with all mixing, the thing you have to do is learn how to manage low end. So, you know, spend some time doing that, listen to great records mixed by great mixers, and unless you're doing film score, then listen to someone else. I have to stop doing that. My mixes sound pretty good. I had a girl once say to me that, you know, that self-deprecating thing you do comes across like loathing. I didn't ask for her number, though.
Good, I think.
Okay, don't we?
Yeah, we do all right.
Who has questions?
Come on, you've got to be kidding.
You've stunned them into silence.
You talked a lot about reverbs, panning. Are you finding you're using sort of more standard plugins, EQ, dynamics, etc., less differently than you would stereo versus an Atmos mix because you've got that additional scape?
Definitely less compression. You know, there's so much more space to work with. You don't have to fit everything into two speakers. And imaging is a whole different ballgame because your left and right isn't from this speaker to this speaker now. Your left and right, instead of being from 11 to 2, or I'm sorry, 10 to 2, could be 9 to 3. You know, so you immediately have more space, so you can use less compression, less EQ. You know, it's a better environment for figuring out. And then I find when I do all that, my stereo down mixes actually sound pretty good.
Yeah, that I can do more with some effects when it's called for, not always, but I like to do interesting things with delays so that the picture is expansive and it sounds, you know, like you're in a stadium or something like sometimes, or some sort of environment where things are bouncing off the back wall, because now all of a sudden you have a back wall. Where in stereo you can only imagine it, and so. Yeah, effects-wise, there's a lot more. It's a lot more interesting. Yeah.
Yes, very, very easy.
Yeah, go ahead.
I asked Alan last session before this about recording. Bob, can you talk about how you would approach recording for something net new Atmos, and also, since you think analog, what's a good hybrid approach? I like hybrid studios as well. I have a setup and look up to you. So what's a consideration for going in the box and coming back to analog, making some sweet things, and then going back? So the U-turn in the new world. If you can just talk about that a little.
All I can do is just from my own sort of way of doing things, which is a bit strange, I think. But what was the first part of the question? I missed it. I forgot.
Thinking about recording for Atmos in mind.
I don't do that much recording. I mean, generally, I always like it when there's extra ambience mics. You know what I mean? Especially for drums, it's nice if there's two sets of actual stereo mics. You know, one fairly close and then one maybe pointing at the other wall, the opposite wall, or something like that. And so that's a great thing. And even on guitars and things like that, if there's a couple of ambience mics that are based pointing at the ceiling, that kind of thing. You know, so
You have, say, two sets of ambience mics for the drums. Do you spot them as pairs of static objects, or do you use a pair as a reverb send, or
static objects? Yeah. I mean, sometimes I'll put the first pair on the side, the second pair in the rear, or maybe the second pair in the rear overheads, something like that. You know, I just try different things with it and see what works the best.
There's a Village Recorder in their Studio D they have a live chamber in the studio, and if you put the drums in front of them and open the door, it's like a 3-second decay, and so I'll put 4 mics in there, and that become my height. And you can control how much reverb there is by how much you open the door. Have you ever worked there?
Where is it?
Village, Studio D.
I've never actually recorded.
Oh my
I
God.
mixed something there once, but
I love recording drums there. It's just crazy. It is a great. I spent a lot of time there because one of my clients has a room there, and I like the room.
what you said, because in the early Bryan Adams records, at the studio called Little Mountain in Vancouver, it's a massive, huge, very dead room. And so we set the drums up in front of a door leading to a loading bay, a concrete loading bay, and put the room mics out there.
And he's wondering where I got the idea from.
Quick question of both of you. Huge fan. We're all failed musicians at Keycode, and we all fancy ourselves mixers and masters and wonderful. That being said, what percentage of work are you getting now that is being asked of you that is Dolby Atmos compared to stereo work? And do you see that changing over time, say the last 5 years to now? Can you say how many people are reaching out to you saying, I just need the stereo mix, or how many are coming to you now asking, I need Dolby Atmos? And for those people that are on the fence, thinking about diving in, should they? Do you see this as a trend? Is this something that they will be necessarily have to be successful in their career?
Well, for me, I just actually told Mark Chesler from Dolby that Atmos has pretty much changed my life. I mean, I'm just doing, well, most of the time, I mean, I mixed one album this year where they said, it was a singer from Columbia. They said, oh, no, we don't want any Atmos. Like, really? They just wanted stereo. That's really unusual nowadays. You know, pretty much everybody wants, if you're going to mix an album, they want an Atmos version. And I mean, I did it for the guy. He's got Atmos mixes whether he likes it or not. You know, because now I think that's the way my brain works. You know, I just think that way, and I can't not do it.
I'm the same way. Everything's in Atmos. The funny thing is, so I was talking about before, it's Interstellar's 10th anniversary, so we had never done Atmos because Chris Nolan, like, he preferred we mix in mono, to be quite honest with you. And so the label reached out to me and said, can you do an Atmos mix? I said, let me see if I could find the assets. I found the assets. I said, sure, I'll do an Atmos mix. And I do an Atmos mix, and we finish it. It's killer. We master it. And at the last minute, the record label, and if this is streaming, please stop it now. The last minute, the record label said, you know, we should just check with Chris Nolan and make sure that this is okay. And he kiboshed it. He said, yeah. So I have this incredible sounding Interstellar Atmos album that you will never hear, unless you come to mix. Oh, you can hear it, unless you come to mix with the masters, and then you will hear it.
So I'll tell the flip side of that story. There was a concert that's currently on one of the streaming services, and I guess this goes to the point of, as a mixer, you can kind of educate your clients and your post supervisors. One of my mixer friends, his client said, all right, we're going to do this concert in 5.1, and he just casually said, can I do Atmos? And the post super was like, yeah, I guess so. And so now that concert is actually on the service in Atmos. So, you know, educating your customers, if you are comfortable with the technology and you want to work in technology, that, you know, that's valid. So, yes, another question.
Check. I got a question. What are you guys doing as far as mixing Atmos to keep the dynamics of the stereo mix? One thing about Atmos that I notice is True Peak is a challenge for keeping the dynamics of a song from stereo to Atmos. What are you guys doing to try to maintain the dynamics of a song? Sorry. Thank you.
Doing next week. You're better at the song dynamics thing than I am.
I don't know. You know, it's weird. It's a tough question because I don't really find it's that much of a problem. In fact, sometimes you kind of want less dynamics in the Atmos mix just because it's pulled apart, you know, from the stereo. And so to kind of let it sort of glue back together, because I have an actual analog, a 16-channel analog compressor on my mix bus, and so I'll just hit it a little harder, and I don't actually look for more. It's a horrible thing to say because I love dynamics, right? And I hate it when I get something back from mastering and they've squashed the hell out of it through an L2 or something like that. But you kind of, I don't know. I did something for Brittany Howard, and they said, well, it just doesn't seem to have the impact that the stereo does. I go, really? Okay. I cranked the compressor and I don't know, pushed a bunch of stuff, and they went, yeah, there we go. Okay.
But your point is well taken. It can fall apart if you pull things apart. I think that if with experience in Atmos or in immersive mixing, you get better and better at knowing what will work and what won't work. And I think also what you're talking about, having a multi-channel. See, in my world, I don't do master compression because I don't deliver anything as a singular master. I do, but that's not what they're going to use in a film. They're going to use the stem. So all of my mastering is happening on each individual stem, and then my master mix just has a brick wall on it. So I don't have the ability to do that the same way where the vocal sort of glues it all together or the snare does it, that stuff. So it's a bit of a different ride, but I'm so used to doing that now. When I do have a master bus, I feel like I overdo it all the time. Not that it doesn't sound okay. Yeah. It depends. It depends on what the application is. If it's being, a lot of times in the film you're using a piece of it, and a lot of times in the film you need to be able to control the vocal because you have dialogue to deal with. So usually we'll deal with stems, and probably not in Atmos. Probably the Atmos mix in a situation like that would just be the music release, but in the film we would be asked for individual stems, not necessarily in Atmos, to be able to, because otherwise you have, or it could be source music, it could be coming out of a radio and then all of a sudden it comes in the front, so you need to have what the industry calls FUTs. You need to be able to FUTs it, so you pull out all the low end and then you just automate it back in and stuff. So it's hard to just take a static piece of music and work it into a film.
So I go onto my Apple Music and I check out every couple of days, okay, what's new in the spatial audio category? And sitting here and realizing that so much of that music that I'm really, really enjoying has come from the two of you has been an absolute thrill. So, ladies and gentlemen, Alan Meyerson and Bob Clearmountain. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you guys so much. We are now going to prepare for our raffle prize, and then after that, we're going to stick around for an hour. There's still the Dolby Atmos home theater experience. We have our vendors in the room, and we're going to just keep playing audio here until the cops come. No, I'm just kidding. But before that, while we're getting ready for the raffle, I just want to introduce you to the president of Keycode Media who hosted this event, and this is our facility here today.
Thank you all for coming. One of the things I really wanted to highlight, I've been in the industry now 30 years, and the speakers were amazing because the technology is one thing. The technology is just a tool to make it happen. What really makes a difference is the ability for a community to come together and everybody to collectively up our game. And I think that's one of the things that Dolby Atmos, from a technology level, can really make a huge difference as people ramp up and become even more skilled with mixing movies and albums and just changing how we experience sound, which is part of our life. And at Keycode Media, we really try to help the community to be a venue and to bring technology and incredibly talented speakers to talk about how they use the technology to help inspire people to go to the next game. And one of the things they asked a question on what to do. Last year, one of our 2011 summer interns won an Emmy for sound mixing on Last of Us, the television show. So just really exciting. That was Chris Battaglia. And it's just exciting to see people progress in the industry. And really, my hope vision and dream is that the information you learned about the technology, the speakers that inspired you and gave you both tips and thoughts of ways to approach how you create sound can allow us all to collectively up the game and keep the industry strong. So thank you very much for attending. It's been a pleasure to host you, and we're now going to have the raffle.
Hey, everybody, get your raffle tickets out. I'm Tony with Keycode Media. They're bringing in jazz hands for the fun raffle part. Pull them out. Let me make it clear. A lot of people